You're listening to the official Minnesota Wild podcast, presented by Acrisure.
It's Wild Weekly on The Fan.
Pass it from Kaprizov, Johnson scores!
Now here to talk about the Minnesota Wild and the NHL. From the Wild, Kevin Falness. And from The Fan, Brandon Mileski.
Hey, good evening. Welcome to KFAN Wild Weekly. Brandon Mileski along with Kevin Falness from the Minnesota Wild Radio Network. Kevin, the Wild had been struggling there for a bit, but come up with a big 2-1 shootout win last night over the division rival Colorado Avalanche, and a team that you fear them when they have the puck on their stick, and the Wild kept them in check defensively all night long.
Yeah, it was an impressive effort by the Wild because they had been struggling. Offense is going to be an issue here, especially with the guys that are out, mainly Kirill Kaprizov, and I think the offense has kind of dried up for him. So they need to have that wonderful defensive structure, and they headed to a T against the Avalanche, and you needed to. I mean, that's a team that's loaded. I looked down the middle for that team last night, and, of course, with the trade deadline, they go and they add Brock Nelson, they add Charlie Coyle. Now they've got their number 2 and number 3 center. They got Jack Drury in the Rantanen trade in the first place, and then, of course, you got Nathan MacKinnon on the top line. So down the middle, they're as solid as they come. I don't think last night was a good example of what the Colorado Avalanche are when they're at their top form. That's going to be a beast in the Central Division to deal with, but the Wild played a perfect defensive structure game, and they got the 2 points. Not
only were they good defensively, I think a lot of that, Kevin, is they had a sense of desperation to them last night, right? They'd lost 5 of 7. All of a sudden, just a 7-point lead over Vancouver and St. Louis in the wild card standings after you kind of probably had a chance to bury Vancouver Friday night and outplayed them, but ran into a hot goaltender there up in British Columbia. And, you get to the point where, man, all of a sudden we're playing Colorado and we lose this one, and if Vancouver wins, all of a sudden it's 5 points, and you start getting into a little bit of nail-biting mode there. So I felt like even though they are lacking a little bit of offensive talent, obviously with some of those key guys out, that the mindset was great last night in terms of effort and intensity and desperation.
Yeah, and I think the Colorado Avalanche are going to do that for you. I mean, you see them on the schedule, and you know what they're all about, and you know that they're rising up through they had won 6 straight coming into that hockey game. And if that doesn't grab your attention, I don't know what does. So the Wild did. They played it incredibly well. I thought Philip Gustafsson was fantastic.
Great.
Especially in the overtime. The shootout, Nate just made it a little bit easy on him. He lost the handle on the puck, but regardless, he stopped Nathan MacKinnon. And those 2 big saves in overtime were monsters.
Both of them in the shootout, you could tell, even the MacKinnon one, I think that puck kind of flipped up as he went to make his move, so he did not get that shot up as high as he would have liked. So I guess that's what happens when you play defense in your own zone for so long. It just chews up all the ice in your own zone and helps you come shootout time.
I guess so. How about the finish move by Matt Boldy, though? Holy moly. That was shades of Mikko Koivu. He just goes to the backhand, roofs it right over Blackwood, and he had no chance on that one.
A little different than Koivu, but I get what you're trying to say with the backhand top shelf. So Boldy does this move all the time on shootouts. He even does it when he has space on breakaways at times, where he comes in and both his feet get very wide, like they're on railroad tracks, and they're not moving. They're just like gliding. And so he'll just take like a quick shot just using his hands, right? Like it's not like the goaltender can get a sense of when the shot's coming. And he's had multiple times where he shoots off of that. And both of those last night, the Colorado goaltender, even the Zuccarello one, he made the move first both times, and he made the move first on Boldy, thinking he was going to shoot off of that. Just a beautiful deke to the backhand. But they were definitely in the goaltender's head there in the shootout because he was making those moves way too early.
And how about the play of Matt Zuccarello? Not only the 14th career game-deciding goal by him, he's also got 3 goals in the last 6 games. It feels like he's stepping up his game, too, in the absence of some of those key pieces. You're going to need guys like Zuccarello to step up. He's a leader on this team. He doesn't wear a letter. He's not like a Jared Spurgeon, Marcus Foligno, but still, he's a leader within that locker room. And when he's out there on the ice, he's a guy that he wants to will the team to win. And I think last night he did a good job putting him on his shoulders.
Well, they need him. They need him. They need Boldy and Marco Rossi right now. They are just obviously handcuffed offensively. They weren't an elite offensive team even when they had Kaprizov. Like, we all had questions about whether their top 6 was enough. And then you take Kaprizov out, who was on pace to maybe win a Hart Trophy before he got injured. They are in desperate need of those 3 guys specifically carrying the load offensively. My favorite thing about Zuccarello is he'll play on the right wing, so he's on his offhand on the breakout. and he'll make like a rink-wide like saucer pass that's like up at the waist, and we'll put it like right on Boldy's stick on the far side. I just think that's incredible.
Yep.
I don't know how
his vision is unbelievable too. I mean, that's why him and Kaprizov get along so well. When 97 is healthy, they are peanut butter and jelly.
They're like the Sedins out there. Yeah, they share a brain.
Yeah, which is creepy as hell, but it's pretty cool to watch.
Wild in the midst of that 7-game homestand and 10 out of 11. And, Kevin, the next 2 games, New York Rangers tomorrow night, St. Louis on Saturday. Those are 2 teams that are both in desperation mode because they are just both sitting outside of the playoff spots in their respective conferences.
Yeah, Wild have an opportunity to bury them both. If they play with the level of intensity they played Tuesday against the Avalanche, they'll be in good shape.
Wild versus the New York Rangers. That's a 7 o'clock start tomorrow night, 6:45 pregame. You'll hear that with Kevin Falness, Tom Reed, and Joe O'Donnell on the call. And speaking of Joe O'Donnell, he will join us next to talk about the Wild right here on KFAN Wild Weekly.
Nobody there. The Wild still. They got a 2-0. Ralston and Zuccarello shot. He scores! A breakdown by the Avalanche, and Zuccarello floats it top shelf, and the Wild have a 1-0 lead.
Yeah, Joe O'Donnell, Tom Reed on the call last night on the Fan. Matt Zuccarello with the lone goal in regulation. He also added one in the shootout as the Wild beat the Colorado Avalanche 2-1 in a shootout last night at XL Energy Center. Brandon Mileski and Kevin Falness. This is KFAN Wild Weekly, and we're now joined by the man who just produced that audio. He's the play-by-play voice for the Wild Radio Network. He's Joe O'Donnell. Joe, thanks for your time tonight. Appreciate it as always.
Appreciate you guys. Thanks for having me. Huge win last night, and very, very much needed.
I was going to say, how big is that 2 points, given they lost 5 of 7, all of a sudden Vancouver was 7 points behind. You start to think, man, that nice little safety net you've had built up all year could get a little bit stressed out there coming down the stretch here.
Yeah, definitely needed it. I think just the circumstances that you touched on, Brandon, the fact you're at home for 7 straight games and didn't win the first one Sunday against Pittsburgh, the injury situation, knowing that you're not going to probably score a lot of goals on a nightly basis right now, given the lineup. Like, it's just, there are multiple factors in there, and the pressure's just going to mount the closer this thing gets to the finish line and the tighter the collar kind of gets around that playoff cushion. They needed this one bad last night, and they got it.
It would feel like the pressure's on the top 6 as well. When you're without Jules Nick and, of course, Kirill Kaprizov, it's going to fall on some big names here in the lineup that are left. And 2 of those guys in particular stepped up last night. In my opinion, Matt Zuccarello had one of his best games, and then Matt Boldy, that finish move, shades of Mikko Koivu.
Yeah, they've got to produce. They just have to. There's you can only rely on the bottom 6 or your AHL call-up guys or guys playing kind of over their head in different roles and extended minutes. You can only ask so much of those guys, right? Like, Freddie Gaudreau's having a great year. You can't ask him to score every night. It's just not realistic. Marcus Johansson kind of is what he is at this point in his career, like, plays with good pace, going to get a few chances a game, but mostly he's a setup guy. Ryan Hartman, we've seen score in waves throughout his Wild tenure. But again, like when you're paying some of these guys the amount of money they're getting paid and you're asking them to be impact players nightly, like the onus is on those guys, the Zuccarellos, the Boldies, and even to some extent, a younger player like Marco Rossi. With the guys out that you mentioned, Kevin, like they have to, these other guys, these top-end guys have to produce. The Wild, look, they want to play the same style no matter who's in the lineup. I get that. Like, that's not a Wild thing. That's an that's every team in the NHL. They don't want to change who they are based on who's in and who's out. But right now in particular, they have to check well. They have to try it. Like, if they get 2 goals in a game, they feel like they have to win that game. That's just the way they're built right now.
Yeah, I was just going to bring up that exact same point to you, Joe, and maybe you could just touch on it further, because last night that Wild team does look like a different team philosophically than we've seen for most of the season, right? A team that's typically been playing with speed and comes at you in waves, and maybe part of that was just the competition last night, but obviously they haven't scored a lot over the last couple of weeks. Is that kind of the strategy here moving forward until Kaprizov and Eriksson get back in the lineup? Is we got to win 2-1 games and we got to be good defensively, and at least with the goaltending they got last night, they're able to pull that off.
Yeah, I mean, going into the game against the Avalanche, John Hines told me, like, we can't give them easy offense, meaning the Avs. You got to get great goaltending. He touched on a couple of things the Wild would look to do offensively where maybe Colorado struggles a bit, but the biggest thing was don't give them easy offense, and we need some saves, and they got it. I thought the desperation level last night was huge. Even just in that third period, it's in the offensive zone. Foligno dives for a puck trying to swat it to the blue line to keep the Wild in business there. They finished with 22 block shots, the Wild did last night, which is about a handful over their season average. They average just about 16 a game. So you like to see that extra desperation, that good active sticks in the D zone, challenging the Avalanche in the neutral zone. Like, they didn't give them a lot of open ice. There weren't many 2-on-1s or 3-on-2s for Colorado. Like, that's got to be the style of play. And Brandon, I don't think, I've kind of talked to John Hines a little bit about this. Like, he's not going to go to the team in a meeting and say, hey guys, we have all these good players out. We can't score enough goals right now, so let's try to win 1-0 and 2-1. Like, you don't want to send that message to the rest of the team that you don't believe they can produce offensively. But ultimately, they know they have to keep, kind of hammering home that point of we play this way all the time. That's going to give us the best chance to win.
I asked Tom this last night on the air. I'll ask it to you as well. We saw how active the Avalanche were at the trade deadline, and we know where the power has been in the Central Division. It's been all about the Winnipeg Jets. With the moves the Avalanche made, despite the fact they lost to the Wild last night, have they closed the gap a little bit with the Jets and adding a Brock Nelson, a Charlie Coyle, and then, of course, all the fancy pieces they already have?
Yeah, I think they have. I think Dallas has as well. Not that the gap was that great between those teams. I think Winnipeg ultimately will probably win the division. Like, I don't think Dallas or Colorado will catch them. But I think the depth that has been added in those two cities and organizations in particular with the Avs and the Stars really makes them a little bit more formidable down the stretch. Now, my big question with Colorado, and kind of thinking it as we were watching the game unfold last night, is how do those pieces blend in? Like, that's a lot of new players this late in the year, shuffling guys in and out. They're going to have a few guys that are healthy scratched if they remain healthy down the stretch here, like guys with a lot of NHL experience you're asking to sit out maybe nightly or every couple of games because you're rotating in players. Like, it's a good problem to have, but I wonder how they all blend at the end of the day. There's not a lot of practice time down the stretch of an NHL regular season with the games being so condensed, especially with the Four Nations face-off. So can you get a lot of practice time? Can you figure out your line combinations? Is that something they can piece together? If it is, I think they'll just, they'll be as tough as anybody in the West to bounce. That's the one thing I do have a little bit of concern about. Look at the Avs last year. They added Yakov Trenyon, of course, signed with Minnesota. They added Casey Middlestat. Off the top of my head, I don't have last year's transaction history in front of me, but I'm sure they made other moves. And it's like sometimes you make a bunch of moves to bolster your roster, and then how do they fit? How does it work? Does it mesh well? That'll be my biggest question with the Avs moving forward.
Talking with Joe O'Donnell, play-by-play voice for the Wild, the radio network Wild, back in action tomorrow night when they host the New York Rangers at XL Energy Center. How about what the Wild did before the trade deadline then? We've now seen 5 games of Gustav Nyquist. We've seen 3 games of Justin Brazeau. Do those two fit with the Minnesota Wild?
I really like the Nyquist acquisition. I know he doesn't have a point yet, but he's been all over the ice as far as every situation. We've seen him now killing penalties. We've seen him on the power play. Obviously, we know 5-on-5. I feel like you can fit him on a couple of different lines. If you want him to play a skill game, if you need him to play a little bit more of a second or third line role, he's comfortable with the organization. He knows a lot of these guys from having spent time here a few years back when they got him at the deadline. That time he was with Columbus. He was injured, but eventually came back and played a few regular season games for the Wild and then played in that Dallas Stars playoff series. So I think there's a comfort factor with Nyquist. I think you can kind of just piece him in anywhere. I like his hockey smarts. John Hines has talked about his good hands. I mean, I just think he's, he might not be a 30-goal guy. I know he had a breakout year last year in Nashville offensively, but I just think he's a nice fit, and you didn't have to give up a lot to get him. As for Brazeau, I think the jury's going to be out. This might be a little bit of a tryout for him too. Does he show the coaches and the scouts and the management enough with the Wild to deserve a contract this summer? Can you get him with Andy Ness, the Wild skating coach? Because the knock that we that we heard when the Wild traded for him. Big guy, good hands, but just doesn't move that well. Okay, well, Andy Ness has been known to work with some of the Wild's best players over a number of years. You look at the transition Rossi made recently. I've talked with Andy Ness personally about Marco Rossi just a couple weeks ago, and he said he totally changed his stride. It's made him, like, tangibly a faster player, like stopwatch faster, right? Like, they're able to say, hey, you skated like this. Now with this work, you skate like this. You're that much quicker. So do they see enough in Brazeau to re-sign him? Do they see enough in him to say, let's let him work with our development staff over the summer, our strength coach, and then build, sort of a better base for him? Still young, big frame, good hands. I think there's a lot to like there. He just hasn't really popped so far, in my estimation, with Minnesota.
You have to give something to get something. I get that, but are you surprised they pulled the plug on Marat Hustendinov this early in his career? I know offensively he's been underwhelming, to say the least, but he was a second-round pick not that long ago.
Yeah, he flashed for me, Kevin, with his speed. I think he did that for a lot of fans. If I'm being quite honest with you, as the year moved along, I'd sort of seen, I felt like I'd seen what I'd seen, right? Like, I don't know what the upside is there. And maybe he shows out in Boston. Maybe it's not Boston. Maybe it's his next destination. He's still such a young player. It's just he never spent time in the American Hockey League until basically the Wild had to send him down because they had no roster room, and then they dealt him. Like, I would love to see how some time in the AHL could potentially benefit a kid like Hustendinov because of two things. One, you're going to get a lot of ice time, which he needs. And number two, you've got to want it when you're in the American Hockey League. Like, when you're just a full-time NHLer at a young age, I think you can get a little comfortable. I'm not saying that was the case with Hustendinov, but you've got, 7-hour bus rides after games and 3 games in 3 days. Like, that tells you what kind of makeup and character a player has. So I would have liked to have seen him had to grind it out a little bit more and kind of earn his NHL opportunity. Just because of circumstance, it never happened. So I don't know what to make of Hustendinov. I was a little underwhelmed offensively. I saw way too many again, just a broadcast opinion, like, come over the blue line, curl up. Come over the blue line, spin up. It's like sometimes you got to take the puck to the net. Sometimes you got to shoot a little bit more. Again, the offense was a little underwhelming for me.
2 more questions for Joe Donnell, play-by-play voice for the Wild, the radio network. We've seen 4 games of Ryan Hartman since coming back from that long suspension. 2 points. He did have that goal against Pittsburgh the other day. Their depth was so thin offensively. I feel like Hartman's been pretty noticeable here in the last 4 games, especially just him and Foligno together. Seems like they're getting that forecheck going. What are your thoughts on Hartman post-suspension?
Yeah, I'd agree, Brandon. I think he's had an impact. He's brought what they need him to bring. Maybe he had to shake a little bit of rust there, not playing for several weeks because of the suspension and the break for the Four Nations face-off. We had him on the post-game show on the Wild Radio Network on Sunday after the loss. He scored the only goal for Minnesota. He said he put in the work. He said he felt good. I don't think a lot of fans realize that during the season, these guys, they don't work out a ton as far as, like, heavy lifting, as far as, like, muscle gaining exercises, right? They're just kind of maintaining what they have. So Hartman during that time, because he wasn't playing games, was maybe to get a little bit stronger, like maybe stronger than he's been this late in the season in his career. So I hope that benefits Minnesota down the stretch. They certainly need him, especially now with the injuries. If they're able to get healthy and he can slot into like a third-line center or right-wing role, be that agitator, walk that fine line, score some timely goals, that's what Ryan Hartman's all about.
Only like 17 games left in the season. 2 of those games will be against the New York Rangers, including tomorrow night in St. Paul. Game, 3 of the 7-game homestand? The Blue Shirts of Broadway come in. We know where the Wild are, fighting for their lives to stay in the top 8 in the Western Conference. The New York Rangers, of all teams, are outside of the top 8 in the Eastern Conference. Lost last night in Winnipeg. They've dropped 4 in a row. What do you expect tomorrow night in a desperate, if not dead, New York Rangers team?
Yeah, they need points bad. I was just starting to look, at some of their numbers right before I jumped on with you guys because we haven't seen them yet this year. In fact, these 2 teams haven't played since November of last season. They played twice in a 5-day span in November, and these 2 sides haven't met since. So a lot for me to catch up on with the Rangers. They're scoring 3 goals a game, which is just in the upper echelon, 13th in the league coming in. but they're giving up. Their goals against is 3.06. That's a little surprising there. To me, tomorrow night, again, because of the Wild's little bit of lack of production offensively on a consistent basis, and with I'm assuming Igor Shesterkin in net for the Rangers, like it might be a race to 2 tomorrow. We'll see if the Wild can defend well, carry over some of the good habits in the Colorado game, keep the Rangers at bay early. But I expect a very desperate New York team, and then looking ahead to Saturday with the Blues coming in, they're just on the outside of a playoff picture. They're kind of playing better. They're without big defenseman Colton Parayko, but that's a Central Division game. The Wild have won the first 3 meetings of the season series against the Blues. So you get the Rangers tomorrow, you get the Blues on Saturday, 2 really big games again from Minnesota on home ice. Hopefully the crowds are showing up and ready to support this team as they look to make a playoff push.
Joe, always love chatting with you. We'll talk to you soon. Thanks for your time tonight.
All right, see you, Brandon. See you, Kevin. Thanks.
All right, Joe O'Donnell, play-by-play voice of the Minnesota Wild Radio Network. Kevin, you and Joe back to work tomorrow night as the Wild take on the New York Rangers. That's a 7 o'clock start. Pre-game at 6:45, live from XL Energy Center.
It should be awesome. Unbelievable. We're in the middle of a 7-game homestand. Only 2 games in. Stop number 3 is tomorrow, and it brings the Rangers. So should be fun. Hopefully everyone will join us.
Yeah, and then that homestand ends. You get 1 game on the road, and you're back at home again for another 3.
Yeah, we love it. That's great.
A lot of Kevin Falness at XL Energy Center over the next 3 weeks. Thanks, Kevin.
Amen. See ya.
He's Kevin Falness. I'm Brandon Mileski. This has been another episode of KFAN Wild Weekly. We'll talk to you next week right here on The Fan.
For an extraordinary advantage in sports, you need a game plan. For an extraordinary advantage everywhere else, all you need is Acrisure. With a high-tech human approach to insurance, cybersecurity, and more, Acrisure helps you take care of what you care about. That makes winning easy. See what Acrisure's extraordinary advantage can do for you at Acrisure.com.